the vision for the project is to improve the level of data literacy of the construction industry. And of course, talking with BRE and Space Syntax, that seems quite easy. Actually not an easy job because you already know. But since we also want to help all the pockets, niches and segments in our supply chain, it becomes quite a daunting exercise. We want to do that because part of our mission is to pursue innovation in the construction sector. And one of the ways that we started thinking about would be to use open data assets and develop and kind of support the creation of a construction-specific developers community. So in a way similar to what happened to civic hacking in the open government movement, unleash data sets which hopefully will be open, machine readable and complete, and then engage with a community of people who can help us. Now, part of the issue I see in that is how do we get together, the supply chain, the small and medium SMEs, and the developers, because they've never met each other. But that's an interesting, challenge, we think. So we're going to start with the vision. Depending on time, I may ask you to comment on that or not. And then it's a very simple 4-step conversation. We'll start with the opportunities. So where do you think growth will be generated by trying to produce this construction-specific developers community? And how do you think transparency will improve the image of our industry? The reason why we touch on the image of our industry is because we are responding to the government 2025 report. And in that document, it's very clearly specified that in order to retain the talent, in order to bridge the skills gap that we are facing in the next 25 years, we need to change our industry. And we just ran quite an interesting event at the RIBA a couple of weeks ago on this. So these somehow had the opportunities. We will then move on to the risks. And as Constructing Excellence, one of the campaign that we've been championing for the last 30 years is collaboration. And one of the great hurdles for our sector to grow is diversity and fragmentation. And there is a risk in having standalone, specifically developed application that fragmentation might even grow. So I would just kind of, since you've been working with data for incredible amount of time with incredible results, comment on this. So, what do we need? What kind of enabler do we need to put in place to ensure that open data opens up the conversation, improve collaboration, rather than create silos kind of mentality in this respect. We will then kind of move high level, trying to start a conversation on the specific elements of the creation of an open data development attitude. And I don't know if we could, but it would be great if we could give some example of how a systemic approach to complex issues, as urban planning give us, as building sites give us, and how a systemic approach is the first step towards a kind of multi-layered understanding of issues, from the understanding of which we can then develop a new app, and a new system, a new product. And this is where I would ask BRE and Space Syntax to tell us about their experience, because you guys are measurable, data-driven, value enablers and value creators, and we need more of that in order to unleash that additional transparency. In order to change the image of our industry, we need to be more transparent, and we need to measure the value we create. The last bit, it becomes really quite operational. We're talking about measuring and monitoring, and then we will touch on, and again, this is your experience, how measuring and monitoring have changed, for instance, in the last 20 years, how field activity is no longer that necessary as used to be. I remember your work on Trafalgar Square was quite
or
something
maybe
on
it
that.
still is.
Or maybe it still is. It'll be great to challenge kind of, collective awareness on those things.
Yeah.
And maybe we can't trust Twitter's, but kind of data. And again, talking about measuring and monitoring, BRE is a mecca of where things get measured and benchmarks created. Little bit on data sharing and open link data. So, if small developers are to help SMEs in innovating their products, do we need for them just data sharing? Do we need to create a transactional market for data for construction? And in this respect, BRE already has a central bank of those. Or do we need to ask local authorities to just open up their data sets? Or both? I mean, this is just really kind of high level conversation. The last bit is, what's the next step? So it's a very straightforward question. If we need to get there, where would you like us to be in 6 months' time, and in 10 years' time? So it's a kind of scenario work really there. So comments, and then we might just kick off. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose from BRE's point of view, then the opportunities bit is one thing that BRE has probably not thought of before, in terms of that we do a lot of measuring and a lot of measuring of sustainability data, for instance, or we do a lot of measuring and testing of products and construction products.
Yeah.
But actually, one of the things has possibly been that the process has been the important thing. To get there to the certificate has been the important thing, or to get there to the sustainability rating. Whereas actually, one of the things that BRE is beginning to look at is that actually, along that journey of getting there to the sustainability rating, we're collecting a huge amount of data that then we've sort of got to a 4-star or a 5-star rating at the end. But we actually have something much more valuable there, rather not just the 4-star or the 5-star or 3-star rating. So we've got actually a huge body of data there. But right now, I think BRE's maybe waking up to the idea that that huge body of data can be reused. It can be used for different things. It could be used to make the process much leaner, much smarter. It could be used to improve the process. It could be used just to show how different parts of the process, I'm talking, say for instance, about BRAIN, different parts of the process could be integrated with other open data sets or things like that. So that's one of the things BRE have begun to look at.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of going back to what I've said about the process there, the systemic approach, one of the things that I think we're quite keen on, and hopefully we want to do, is to get data out there. So we don't have right now our goal, I guess, if you were to say we have a goal, is to make parts of BRE's data open so that people can reuse them in other applications. But in terms of what people reuse it for, I think that's the really nice bit that we don't know, and we'll probably be really surprised at what somebody uses some of the data for, and that's really good because it's something that we might never have thought of before. So that's what is the exciting part of it for us. Yeah. So I guess that's BRE's approach maybe. In terms of a developer community, it would be very nice. One of the ideas we've talked about is the idea that around BREEAM, say we actually get people to write third-party apps that are sort of use BREEAM data or do something with BREEAM data. Something that, as you maybe said, we in BRE we've got a massive wealth of construction knowledge and of sustainability knowledge, but there might not be the same people who have that massive wealth of sustainability knowledge might not be like really good app developers or really good computer programmers or data scientists. But if we can merge those two together, I think that's where we get the real sort of value and the real value coming out.
So we can imagine in a year's time to have like a hackathon, two days no sleeping event at BRE and come up with some crazy stuff.
I mean, I think there's been nice hackathons that have happened, like for instance around all the flooding data that was from the flooding just last year around in the south of England. And there's some nice hackathons that happened on that, just giving the data out there and saying, well, you try analysing it and come and think of something that we haven't thought of before. And I think that's quite a nice model to use, especially because you might find somebody who actually comes up with something really of value, and then from a bigger organisation like BRE's point of view, you've got an immediate partner there who is extremely well educated and can find something in your data, and from the partner's point of view, they've got possibly an income stream or some possible value in partnering up with the bigger organisation. And I think that's a nice model, because you've got the massive sort of, it's the big sort of traditional big organisations like BRE maybe, or like sort of massive construction firms, and you have the idea of having these smaller satellites round about, which are really quick and agile developers, really quick and agile startup type organisations. Seems a really nice way to work.
Absolutely, it's really awfully exciting. I mean, I managed just to cool down a bit. It's great stuff already.
There's a strong sense in conversations that the answer to everything will be an open hackathon in which we're streaming live sensed data, and sort of the future roll credits, the end, everyone lives happily ever after. And I think this is coming from so many people that there's got to be something in it. But at the same time, I think it's worth stepping back, before we go there, and before everything's rosy and we're all happily sort of engaged in this future new world, to roll back and say, well, why and how and what else is there in the equation that will truly be needed to deliver what we're all hoping for? Because I don't think it just comes down to open data. I don't think it just comes down to better methods of sensing and gathering data remotely, and live streams and semantic analysis, which I think those are all the new and exciting elements on a data journey that we've all been on for quite some time. And I think it's worth remembering some of the purposes of that journey, the drivers of that journey, because the best hackathon is one that's led with a question, and I think I'm interested to talk about the questions as to why we think open is the way forward, and why we would think a relationship between a developer community of software hackers and an SME community is the right way forward, and what else we need to bring along. So, I mean, from my perspective in architecture, the data journey, I think, is the one to start with, and say, okay, in architecture, for the last 25 years, I think architects and urban planners have been on a data journey that began with the first computer arriving in the practice, and the cynicism and doubt, and what's this alien thing doing in my office that's used to drawing with ink, and basing ideas for the future, grand ideas, world-changing ideas, on best practice, which was basically down to professional opinion, which was down to what you'd learned at college and what you'd learned maybe on a few building sites before you then entered your architectural studio and sort of practiced. And so that was, and to a degree still is, the prevailing sense in one part of our industry, in the professional design practice. So just saying, well, let's have an open hackathon and invite all the architects, we've got to remember that it's only 25 years ago that they were all in smocks and drawing with ink. And that attitude has changed. The computer is now fully embedded in the design process as a tool to draw. But I think alongside the idea of openness and data streaming, I would like to think of the idea of creation being a great opportunity, a great part of a future vision. It may not be specific to the needs of your project, but I think what's going alongside perhaps ideas of open data in the construction industry are the uses of data and computing as generators of ideas, rather than as just slaves that sort of you drop all your data into. The computing digital process is becoming an enabler, a creator of ideas, which is really fantastically interesting to I think not just architects, but anybody, any consultant involved in planning and design, because you've now got this tool to throw up new possibilities. And that flip from this receiver of your great professional opinion to a partner around the table in terms of, I'm thinking of parametric generative design, those are all happening around this general discussion about whether the process should be open or not. And so I think when you are talking to other architects and planners in the creative industries, I would be challenging them around that, and in one sense, and in another, just be aware of where they've come from. That they've come from the world of the inky smock, and to have a digital assistant is kind of okay, but to have a digital creative partner, I think, is a really great new thing.
In a way, it's not something that architects or planners can do alone. There is an element of innovation and research that has to be done in collaboration with other professions out there that can help us understanding data set. I mean, data scientists should become another partner in a design team in new plans and projects.
And I think this is where in the past, the best architects work with a team of consultants around a table, and you have a say, you have a discussion, and then the idea gets formed from all of those inputs. The worst kind of architects say, I know it all, here's my design, you show me how to build it. That's a terrible way of proceeding. It still prevails in some parts. The best is the integrated approach. I think the opportunity to integrate is the massive opportunity that digital brings us, and I would sit alongside open as a key driver of future development, future innovation throughout the whole of our industry. And the more that we can have other people's information on our desktop when they can't perhaps be physically present, or the more that their algorithms can be embedded in our algorithms, will create, I think, a richer product at the end of the day. And if those algorithms and the data that drive them are open, then it ought to be an accelerated process. But I think the open is alongside the integrating aspect of the future.
You have the I guess bleeding edge, where you have large practices who are really willing to adopt sort of new technologies and new practices. But just from experience, I've seen that even because the construction industry is such a wide spectrum, you've got a 10-man sort of product manufacturer who makes toilet cubicles, who you have to convince to say, well, the data that you've got about your toilet cubicles, can you make that open? Can you make that available to us? And I've seen that could be quite in a similar way, but in a smaller scale. That's a similar thing to say. Well,
it's interesting because your organisation is so much bigger than mine. I mean, we're 20 people, and I see large organisations having the same problems you've just described. As can you move a bit faster, please? I think the difficulty of a conversation like this is we're both at the leading edge. We're just differently sized, and probably I think no matter what the size of the organisation, there's a lot of inertia to move that organisation forward. The small organisation, 10 people, doesn't have the budget to invest in the upgrade of the software or whatever is required to move them on. The large organisation might have too many meetings to go through to make it onto the agenda. And
it's also what you said about process as well, and that the idea of saying we'll use or we'll implement some open data strategies doesn't mean it can be quite disruptive as well, because you have something that you say might have been going for 25 years, and you said actually you're going to do these stages differently, and you're going to do these parts differently now, which can be quite, if that's been embedded in an organisation for 25 years, and then you say, because you're going to adopt open data, because you're going to let other people use your information and your data, then you're going to have to do all these stages differently, and all these things that you've done for the past 25 years and your company has done and they're almost set in stone, you have to change them, which can be quite difficult to
what's appealing about the whole kind of startup hackathon sort of emphasis and allure is the fact that you're starting from scratch with something which is small, tiny, easy to fund, measurable. Is it working or not? In a way, the change management of adapting big organizations towards a different approach to their business case is a much tougher issue.
That's where I see that idea of the large company working with a small sort of startup or a small lean startup being very good, because it's almost the large sort of company or the large structure moving what they would term, I guess, is the risky part, and moving it into a small, lean, agile startup who can do things very, very quickly, change it round, try something else really quickly, and they've not got that sort of, they don't have to change the main processes that they're using or working with.
And you don't want to change too much too quickly, because it makes commercial sense for there to be a degree of stability in a business. But I think having a part of your business, whether you subcontract it to another organisation or whether you embed it somehow into your own, and I think the more you can embed it, the better, because it'll be more directly cultural than it will be to say, well, we've got this other organisation doing it for us. That's, no matter what scale your organisation is, to me that's the model of any organisation, that you have one part of it which is absolutely there to think creatively, to take risks, and to continuously address what's new out there and evaluate how it could be incorporated into the current business. And hackathons and openness and sensing are out there right now. I think every organisation needs to be aware of them, and then to say, well, is it me who's going to have to do all the innovation in order to figure out how my business can change? Or are there other organisations who can do it better, who can then deliver some product that I can then exploit back into my business?
It brings us back to collaboration and avoiding, duplication of work and learning together.
And that's key, I think. That's where industry networking matters more than anything, so that you don't have to write your own software. You can just download it because someone else has done it, but you're aware of it because of the networking that you do as a business. So even before you have the culture of research, development in your own business, you need the culture of networking. And I think that then gets you to the subject of openness. It's having that degree of openness of discussion with other organisations, to have an openness of what you're currently doing as a business, and to have the openness to say to someone else, look, I'm prepared to give you this if you're prepared to give me that in return. That's an openness of human to human interface, which I think is the foundation of any form of open data platform.
So it being one of our aim to increase the data literacy across the entire built environment, from universities to SMEs. It's interesting for me to hear that we need to go back to people, need to go back to networking platform, we need to go back to sharing lesson learned, and that's how you get the message across. Is that the way we should pursue, or in terms of improving, actually measuring the improvement of how the industry becomes data aware? Would you think of other ways in which we could pursue this aim?
Well, alongside open data, you've got open modelling, because if you want to de-risk the future, it's good to have a model of it. It's good to have a model that you can run, whether it's about logistics or whether it's about construction sequencing, whether it's about the flows of people through buildings and cities. It's good to have a sense of what the future is going to be like with these inputs, and then you can figure, do I need to change the inputs? So in order for you to have those models that can forecast the future, those are then driven on open data. But why not make the model open once you've got it? So it's not just open data, it's open modelling. And then you can share the model, and that's a BIM 3 type of conversation. So we're all working off the same model. I think that change of scenery, if you like, that integrated operational approach will in itself drive an openness, because there'll be no other way of working. Sure, you can close some parts of the model off and just have a little tunnel in and a little tunnel out for your own purposes, but generally I think the culture will change the more we integrate our modelling platforms as well as our data spreadsheets. and that's exciting.
And what I like about this is it brings us back to projects, which is what we do on a day-to-day basis. We create buildings and infrastructure, and we do that through a process called project, and that's where we can all learn a different way of working. And I think when we get to site and we can start measuring things, there is an opportunity for the big guys, the main contractors, to share some of their best practice with the rest of their supply chain. Is this happening, or how can we help that?
What you said about is quite I think is quite interesting, because you have this idea of, I would say it's almost a flip, where actually having a closed process, or having sort of data that you're not sharing, becomes disadvantageous to you because everybody else does it. There's a sort of I think it's a tipping point where actually it means if you have this closed process that only you work to with closed data, then you don't actually get to join in. So I mean, you can see that with some modern BIM software or CAD software, where to be able to read models or to be able to look at models, you have to buy into the £10,000 license in a bit of software. Whereas actually, if you can save it as an open format, then you can read it in any bits of software, which actually it may not be advantageous to the CAD vendor, but to you as an architect or as a construction professional, you can actually share your data with anybody else. They don't need to buy into your system, if you like.
Well, the CAD vendor just needs then to change their business model. So rather than sell single licenses, they have to find other ways of generating revenues, so that they are no longer bound to single customers. They're perhaps more taking revenues to help them drive the research that leads to the next development of the software.
Well, you can also look at the idea that instead of selling a specific piece of software, you sell a recurring service, or you sell a recurring sort of use of server time, use of algorithms, use of something, and it could still be open, but they run them for you. If you look at, say, some of the large sort of open source vendors like Red Hat in the Linux community, I mean, you can get that software for free, but actually they'll run, manage, install, do all the actual process part for you.
Yeah.
And that's where they make their sort of commission, or make their money from doing it.
Yeah.
But you can have the software for free. You can do whatever you want with it.
And commercially, having a cloud-based application allows that to be incorporated into the project finance. So, for instance, in my architectural practice, we use extremely powerful rendering program, which is entirely cloud-based, and as you say, it's free to download. And in each and every project, we can just allow for the adequate resources.
And if you have that idea of a sort of open data space where it's on a cloud or a server, you have that idea of the data there that, as you said, somebody else can come along with a smarter piece of technology or a smarter algorithm that then you can incorporate, and then you can manage your data, or you can improve the quality of the data with that, or you can look at it in a different visualized way. So that's really good, because that's somebody coming along who's maybe not been part of your closed proprietary world before, who's got a completely different angle, or a different algorithm, or a different piece of software, and then they can actually add value to the process and get paid for it as well. I mean, it's not they get paid for it as a service, or get paid for doing it, that analysis on your data, but it still means you're still working on an open model, but it doesn't negate the idea of making money from it, or any sort of commercial part of it.
Yeah, actually, in being able to reference users' patterns with individual companies, there is actually an opportunity for more market to be opened up by monitoring those data. In a way, if Autodesk data on what designers design and eventually end up with in the detailed package could be shared, we could see, for instance, a designer's aspiration for a certain solution which the market is not able to fulfill, and therefore get lost in the process. So in a way, one of the ideas was shared at the RIBA was the opportunity for an open government-led BIM package, as simple as SketchUp, so that SMEs could learn how to do that. But also on the other hand, we will collecting data on how SMEs operate in the UK, and by monitoring those elements, we could improve their outcome.
But I mean, you've got in terms of open formats for like building information models. You have the Building Smart and IFC type formats. So they may not be perfect, but I think they're a good step forward in terms of being a shareable sort of common language between different CAD and BIM software packages, which I think that's probably that's a way out of the proprietary sort of chain. So you've got another way of getting the data out and getting it to sort of other packages, even if it's just into a spreadsheet or if it's just into something that's just very simple to use, and then do analysis from there.
Yeah. We here because we believe that sharing data, being then open or not, will allow us to grow the market, and we are also here answering or starting an answer to the 2025 report, which claims a 70% overall global growth in the construction market. I would like to now tap from your experience and your portfolio of delivered projects and plans, and understanding where do you think growth happening in the next 10-15 years, at planning level or building management and construction level?
Well, I was going to start by thinking geographically. Is that what you're interested in?
Where in the supply chain and where in the world, indeed. So
Yeah.
it's open and quite high level.
Yeah, I think it's easy to start by saying, well, let's look to the Far East and let's look to Latin America, but actually, I mean, in the domestic market as well, we're becoming so much more a digitized community at every scale, professional and non-professional, that I think everything that we do will be pervaded with a data-driven approach, and therefore there will be this very significant need, I think, for tools at every scale and in every part of the construction industry. My own sector of planning and design will be massively transformed, I believe, especially in the field in between the landscape design, public realm design, the urban design, everything that you see in between buildings, the design of streets, which have only partly been digitally designed in the past because they've been run through a traffic model, and the consequences of that have been often very negative for places, safety railing and lines on roads telling you to do this, telling you not to do that, don't go here, go there, lights against you, lights for you, and look at the traffic congestion that they've created. The massive inefficiencies that have been produced by a first attempt to try to model traffic are a great opportunity, I think, to say, well, how can we make places flow better? Whether it's adding walking and cycling to the driving mix, but also just being able to drive more efficiently through vehicle control and sequencing and stacking of cars on roads. That, in terms of the need to develop the software to implement it, it creates one opportunity. But the next kind of opportunity is the consequences of doing that, the greater efficiencies of human behaviour that you create. I mean, people get there faster, they get there in a healthier way, you reduce costs on the health industry, you increase the productivity of the workforce. So in lots of different ways, whether it's just the professional need to do the software development or the human social economic benefit that comes from it, we can look as far as we like, but we need look no further than the UK itself to find a very significant market.
What I really like about this, and sorry to jump in, it would allow us to look at public space not as a risk to manage, but an opportunity for creating new value. And in order to do that, we need to engage with a wider picture of a systemic approach. You need to allow for the NHS savings, while budgeting for a cycling route. So this is kind of refreshing also from a designer's point of view.
Yeah.
Sorry, Stephen.
No, I think that's right. If you look at, we'll say, your idea of looking at traffic and simulating traffic and using the data from that, I think it goes back to the idea of if you've got a data set that you can share and you can reuse. If you've got a data set about traffic, the variables that affect traffic out with just the data you have on that traffic is immense, immeasurable. You've got data about schools and when they open. You've got data about possibly about the housing conditions round about and unemployment rates, because that might affect what's happening with the traffic. You've got data on the population and their age, and if those data sets are there and are available and you can bring them in, it helps to make that model much richer. It helps to make that model much more complete, and it helps to find bits that you wouldn't have thought of before. And
it's a great challenge.
Yeah,
it's a great challenge.
You might think that you might find something or some strand that actually you never dreamed would affect the traffic in the city, and that's why the congestion happens. But you might find that because you can merge these data sets. And also, I mean, going back to the idea of construction sector, the idea that you use and build up all this big body of data as you're creating a building or as you're creating a structure, and then it's used just in that process of creating the building, or it's just used in that construction process. Actually, the life of the building, that information is extremely valuable, and I know that has been looked at before, but it's been looked at to a great extent, especially with some of the government soft landing strategy, where you say, actually, well, maybe we can take from when the building was first thought of by the architect and the client right through to when it was handed over and how it's run through an FM system, and right to the end when actually we're going to deconstruct that building, or we're going to actually change the use of that building, so we can use all that information to help make that new process better. And that's where I suppose the life cycle part of it comes in.
And there's a reasonable concern that this is incredibly difficult, because we're having to take all of these different variables, not just material variables, environmental variables, but social variables and economic ones. And goodness me, isn't that just all too much? And I'd say, well, no, what a fantastic challenge to, in the age of algorithms, that we should take one of these challenges into the construction industry to say, well, actually, the simplistic models that we've been using don't seem to be working, because life is more sophisticated than one or two variables. So if we need to have a few more variables in the model, well, let's develop the model. But from my experience of having developed models, you need to have an integrated data set. You need to have data from all of those different places coming together and being processed, analysed. You need to find the correlations within the data to be able to then project into the future. And that effort is a massive effort, but it's a worthy one, and it will be one that would have incredible social and economic gains. And perhaps, rather than see the title of the project as Open Data in Construction, I'd like to see it as Open Data in Construction and the constructed environment, so that we don't, as you were saying there, we don't stop at the point where we complete the construction, but actually we see that as just a moment in a continuous sequence of data gathering, modelling, because as soon as you've finished one, you can absolutely guarantee you're starting the next. And a place, if you think about the construction of a place like a town centre or a village centre or a big city, is a place of continuous construction at every scale. Even the little village, there's always someone putting a wall up or digging something.
So if you
the
look
city's
at,
just that on a big scale.
I mean, if you look at the idea that if you can make this construction data available out with the construction industry, if I was going to say one of them, say a major factor in either traffic disruption or population difference is that you make a huge structure, or you make a new building in a town or in a place or in a housing scheme, and that has a major roll-on effect for the rest of it. So
I think one of the greatest opportunity we have there is that data will measure our success, not only in being able to deliver what the scope of work says, but also in creating a wider sense of value for community and environment, and not only in economic sense. we are responding today to the 2025 report, partially as well. And in that report, there is a very specific call for changing the image of construction in order to retain talent and bridge the gap in skills. I'm going back to your experience, your portfolio work delivered of happy clients, and asking you how data helped you letting your client understand the value you added. So that would be my question on getting onto transparency, really.
We use a lot of data on how people behave in space, how they flow in a public space, where they sit, who's there, do they look like tourists, do they look like business people, do they look like local residents, are they talking to each other, have they got their backs to each other? And we've built a business around this that's 25 years old on Thursday of this week, actually. And that data is in a way open. You know, we've been able to stand there and observe the world and record it. And we couldn't have built our business without it. We've also then worked with communities and said, would you like to collect your own data? And so they've done surveys door to door, or they've sat in the park and done similar sorts of counts. And you can build up a picture of how the world is. And it's incredibly valuable for many different reasons, for identifying the parts of the town that people don't like to go to because they feel unsafe. You can hand that to the people whose job it is to keep the place safe, to the police force, to the environmental services, to tidy it up perhaps. Or you can find out which shops are getting more trade than others, and that becomes commercially valuable. So in lots of different ways it has value. When people do it for themselves, collect their own data, and they own it. And then when you present it back to a community, they understand it because you're actually showing them their own life. Now, that's a very direct example of human behavior data, but there are similar opportunities, I believe, elsewhere in the construction industry to say, either collect it yourself, which is actually happening more and more. We're not actually having to go out and ask people to do surveys. We're just grabbing data that they've generated themselves because of, you know, they've walked through a door and it's pinged a sensor and now that's coming through. It's self-generated. And if people understand that actually they're generating the data, they're not just having it thrust at them by consultants, that's helpful. And that's been my experience, that as far as possible, understand the human inputs to the data that are being generated. And when you can, get your client to directly collect and even analyze their own data. And this isn't by any means just a sort of marketing exercise. It's a process of creative collaboration where ideas emerge because you as the consultant wouldn't have spotted them on your own. The clients have and said, well, actually what you've missed is that little cut through the hedge that the kids have knocked through, but now we've all used because it's the fastest way to the bus stop. Great, I would never have got that from an ordnance survey plan. So those little anecdotes build into a body of experience that I think starts to help us understand how data is, it's not artificial, it's actually human generated, and we can all own and understand it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the main things BRE does is to look at data and look at certifying data, showing how sustainable a building is because it uses evidence. And I think if that data doesn't just exist throughout our certification process, but if we can enhance that with, like as you said, maybe user generated data, you know, so a BREEAM sustainability rating isn't just data that we have or one of our assessors has got evidence for, but if we can enhance that in some way, maybe from data sets that are already out there, or maybe from user generated data, that's a good point, then it's always, it just helps in terms of the evidence and the body of evidence that we build up, and it helps us, and it would help BRE to analyse that data more, because we can analyse what we collect, but if we can add to that data there's things that we probably wouldn't have thought of, or as you say, like the route through the hedge, you might never have thought of that. We might never have thought of that some people use some parts of Bream just in a different way, or they use it just because it's the easiest way to get sort of points or credits for that way. But actually we can begin to analyse how people use Bream, how they do things with it, and improve that process.
Yep. I think there are two big ideas under threat that are necessarily under threat, and the first is the idea of proprietary data. Yeah, this is mine.
Yeah.
It's like, this is my ball and you're not playing with it. These things are directly analogous. And the second idea is authority, that authority has vested traditionally in the professional, whereas today knowledge, because of the increased amount of local user generated data, knowledge is being created at a local level and owned at a local level, and individuals have access online to authoritative bodies, whether it's Wikipedia or whether it's an industry they can access by email. All of this is undermining the traditional authority of going to the library to get your data, going to your politician to understand the issues, going to the doctor to get a diagnosis. And this is this is the nature of the time that we're in, that there's this, whether it's a sea change, a phase change, a total reversal, or whether it's just a repositioning, I don't know, but there's something that's been happening for a while that will continue to happen, which is this change in the way that data is seen and the way that authority is then created. And I think as a professional you have to start to understand that authority is as much at the local level, as much at the low level as you like, as it is at the high level, and that you have to learn to understand the inputs from both.
Yeah, if you have your analogy of the ball is a good one. It goes back to something we talked about earlier in terms of there's this flip where if you do have closed data, then at some point it doesn't become valuable because other people can't access it and other people can't use it.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you've got a ball, you can't play a game unless other people are there to play with you. So if you're not sharing your ball or you're not sharing your data, then other people can't play, can't do something, and then you don't get value out of it either, which I think is yes.
I see also the revolution in the perception of authority as potentially a very interesting game changer in industry and in the competitive market, in a way that what's happening here in the consultants' authority is something similar to what's happening already in the intellectual authority. In a way, the relationship between visibility and validation has changed, almost kind of flipped upside down. In a former sort of system, you would need the authority in order to be visible. So you need the validation before the visibility. Now everybody can upload their own data and analysis, and so the visibility proves the validation. And this is an interesting, I think, process that would allow new, smarter, leaner, and agile businesses to come up. If they can prove that what they're saying is correct. The possibility of new markets to open up through the use of data kind of brings us to what the risks are in the widespread use of data. So we talked about the opportunities. Now we would like to focus on the diversity of our industry and the notorious fragmentation that we've been trying to tackle for about 30 years. We know that in order for a new app or a new service to be measurable, it needs to tackle a very specific issue. And in that, some have already seen an opportunity or a risk really for an even more fragmented industry to emerge. I've discovered something interesting by overlapping these two data sets. I have a commercial advantage in putting out in the market a new app. I'm not going to share that with you. Now, we always go back to why do we need to share and why do we need to be open about the data sets. And there is that tipping point that you mentioned earlier that may save us. But I would like to hear your take on this.
I think though that it becomes that you're paying for the skills rather than the access to the knowledge. So that overlap of data You could do it yourself, but you know that there's somebody there who's got an application that's they've proved works, and you're actually paying for that service. So you could get the data yourself, you could make an app yourself, or you could do that data science part yourself, but you're actually paying for that service, which I think is quite a good thing. It's shifting the emphasis on making profit or making value from something, from just I own it and I have it and that's mine and you get access to it through paying me, to actually saying, well, it's open, you can have it, but actually I'm the best person to ask to analyse this data, or I'm the best person to look at this data because I'm an expert in the field. So actually it's paying for the expertise and the skill rather than the access, and I guess that's where I'd see the change in value.
So I think one of the risks to our industry is the changing nature of, for example, patenting, where we've got a highly successful set of industries based on patenting, which has required a degree of closedness until the patent is registered, and then a degree of lack of access to the ideas once the patent is out there, sitting alongside a new kind of business model of openness and sharing. And as you just said, it doesn't mean that the traditional professional will disappear. If they become the best person to do the job, they'll carry on doing the job. It's just there's a mindset change. People are trying to get their heads around new ways of doing business. We're seeing so many new businesses come through, though, that take advantage of crowdsourced activity of one kind or the other, whether it's crowdsourced funding or crowdsourced data for a better understanding of how people flow through places, which is my own benefit of being able to drag multiple data sets generated by lots of people, or crowdsourced house pricing, or crowdsourced flat sharing. You know, that these business models are emerging, but we're still in a very unstable market where we haven't established ourselves in the way that the traditional means of doing business have been established over 100 or 200 years since the Industrial Revolution. So the risk is, can we get people to abandon or evolve from that traditional mindset fast enough to actually create the effort that will really benefit the new kinds of industries going forwards. And I think that's where more case studies really matter, to be able to say that yes, it's Kickstarter here, and it's you know, I stayed in a nice apartment in Paris at the weekend, but I didn't go through any traditional hotel chain to be there, and those are the
Airbnb.
Airbnb.
Yeah.
Airbnb. That we need more of those right in our industry. More businesses based on open source data. More businesses who are prepared to give away their technical notes to the benefit of the industry that they're in, not through only philanthropic means, although that might be partly the case, but also because by enabling the market you're in, you raise the value of the market you're in, which you can then take your share of. And that's been our approach as a business. We've made our software open source, not easily, you know, after quite considerable discussion and tension, but we've done it without an adverse impact on the business. We've made our core software available to anyone to hack, and some people have, some people haven't. A lot of people have continued to come back to us because, you know, why do they want to do it? You know, they know that we'll do it. And secondly, we're increasingly making our data sets open, to the point of about to open an online training platform that will allow people not only to have our open source software, but to really know how to use it. You know, all the instruction manuals and case studies, and we want to push them out there because we want to raise the quality of the industry that we're in. Why be in an industry where you're the top player, but actually the average is dragged down by the quality of the people around you? Much better to be in an industry where the average is higher and you can still be the top player.
Because otherwise the rest of the industry will actually drag you down, you know, either by means of cost or you know. That's it.
There'll always be a resistance. So I think, you know, your project needs to find the same sort of decision point for people to say, actually, we want the industry to be better overall, and these techniques will help us do that, because if we can all, with the right sort of protocols, and maybe we'll come on to talk about different kinds of openness later, because there isn't just one kind of openness, but with the right sort of rules and regulations and protocols and ways of doing business, let's share and be open that this isn't a naive, uncommercial way of doing things. It's actually the more commercial, the more, the cleverer way of doing business.
It is the more clever way of doing business, but for many of our colleagues out there, this might sound incredibly scary. As more of our traditional services
it does
become
and
commodity,
I've seen it.
we need to change our scope of works. I was having this conversation with a structural engineer who said, I was generally scared at the beginning where you would find on the internet applications that would size a beam for you for free in terms of seconds. So the professionals, the consultants need to understand the sheer scale of change which is going on, and innovate our products. And I think the project still is the best.
But it's in the nature of being professional to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we have to remember that whether it's open or if everybody, if there's a general feeling that there should be a particular way of doing things, that as a professional you interrogate it. That's your responsibility. Your next responsibility is to say, well, change is absolutely necessary. So it's the degree of change, the pace of change, the nature of the change, but change is absolutely necessary. And good professionals will remember that this has always been the case. Whether it was just about getting their first computer in the business or being online for the first time, and some of us have just forgotten that because it's become second nature. Yeah. So these new challenges come along and we think it's all for the first time. It's not. It happens in waves, and we should be used to it, and we should be thinking about the next one to be worried about, not the one that we're in. We should accept the one we're in and start worrying about the next one, because that will be a future unfamiliar territory.
I suppose getting into the discussion of the meaning of a data literate industry, you touched on earlier about the different degrees of sharing and openness in data sets. And again, going back to BRASP syntax experience, how relevant it is or important it is to assess the right degree of openness at the beginning of the project, and how is that important for the rest of the industry to understand?
I mean, for BRE, some of the data that we create can't be open just because it's the property of the client. So we measure things that the client has, or we look at the sustainability of their building, but we may take readings and measurements which are actually confidential. But if we can open up as much as possible, then I think that's a very good thing, and I think that is something we're trying to do, even down to being able to encourage, in the future, try and encourage the clients to say, well, it's your data, but if you allow us and grant us access to open it, here's the advantages for you. And I mean, we've got to show the evidence for that, so that's why we're starting out at small scale, if you like, just to put out the data that we have already and try and put that out. But then we can show from using that data, or from other people using that data, what the evidence for actually opening up the client-specific data is. So
I think we need to look at the copyright. We need to look at licensing to use, and we need to look at ownership. And they're each slightly different. So, I can own the data, but I can give you a license to use the data, and we can define the terms on which that license takes place. It's either as open for your own use in any way that you like, or I restrict it to, say, non-commercial uses or commercial uses within this sector, but not competing on these grounds. That's all in the realms of the possible. But I think we need to see how ownership and then copyright, you might own the data, but I'm the creator of the data, and I'll be acknowledged as the person having had that creative contribution. Different people will have a different concern as to whether they actually want to be the owner with all the responsibilities that go with that, or none if you just lock it up, or whether they just want to be acknowledged as the creator, as having had the person to come up with the idea or generate the data in the first place.
Right now in software you have a lot of the Creative Commons flavours of licenses, so you have, like you said, you can have Creative Commons by attribution, if you like, where somebody is free to use your data, but they must acknowledge somewhere that that's data originated from you. There is Creative Commons licenses where you can take the data and you can change it, if you like, and you can add to it, you can enhance it, or you can use it in a different way, whereas there's Creative Commons licenses which say this data set has to stay, or this software has to stay as it is, you can't change the code, but you're free to look at it, to use it. But I think that's, like you said, as long as there's a definite sort of scheme in place where you know what happens when you put your data out there, like it's not just a free-for-all. If you want your data out there, but it's data that's very specific, you don't want people changing the rating of a building, or you don't want people changing the dimensions of some data that you've put out there, then you can put that out under a Creative Commons license or some form of license.
I think taking an action for G4C and BRE, I would see pretty well defined and self-contained exercise there in finding a common language that could be shared with the rest of the industry, from the top to the smaller players, and through that piece of documentation, being sure that we all talk the same language. That's something that we will do for the next 6 to 12 months. So moving on to our last question for today, let's get on some kind of scenario work going. We have 2025 as the deadline where we're going to deliver something, the industry we currently lead and work in, to the next generation. But in the meanwhile, we need some milestones, intermediate and interim, to make sure that we are on the right path. So working within the data, cultural shift, what would you like to see in place in the next 6 and 12 months to make sure that part of all the topics that we tackled today will be acted upon? I
think I would like to see a lot more involvement of non-construction professions in construction, and I mean by that just that the influence or the activity in construction from software or software houses or data scientists to be able to put in ideas in place, because I think one of the nice things by 2025 I would say is that while there's a clear roadmap, I think along the way I think that roadmap will become hugely enhanced, because there will be something that comes up which we haven't thought about, or that I haven't even had an idea about. I think that's the really exciting part. I mean, for me, I think that the most fundamental thing is just to possibly not worry about doing something with somebody else's data, but just put what data you have out there. So even if it's just a small chunk, try and put it out, and then maybe nobody will use it, but hopefully somebody will try and use it, somebody will do something with it, and then that will spark off a little idea. It might help to prove in your company or in your organisation why it's useful to do that, but a minimal amount of work just to put something out there. So be it the smallest data set you have or the smallest bit of open data, I think that would be a really good starting point.
It's brilliant.
I think Stuart's idea is a great one, to find a challenge that could be addressed in 6 to 12 months, or a series of them, where you could say, let's bring some people together and ask them to come with their data, put them in a room together for half a day, and see what they come up with. It's a process that is used in planning and design called inquiry by design. You bring lots of people together, and unusual people together, not the usual suspects, but you bring in representatives from as wide a community as possible, and by the end by the end of the day you've got something unheard of. So this would be doing it in a more data-driven way. Now, you would need that to be facilitated, I think, by people who have competence in data, because, as you say, data science is a very important, new, evolving discipline, and alongside the M&E engineer, the contractor, the architect, the planner, the traditional people around the table, to have a data scientist there may not be unusual in a few years.
Yep.
And will probably certainly be how the process begins, because that sort of skill isn't necessarily going to be embedded in those individual professionals to begin with, if ever. So just as professionals have to have an awareness of each other's skills, then you still want someone else who's really competent at doing that really special thing. I think it'll probably be the case with data science. So try and find a few, bring them along, get them in the room. But I think the other side of this is in the next 6 to 12 months to be able to paint a picture of 2025, of how the UK and how the world are going to be in 2025. So the challenges, and with them the opportunities of population growth, whether it's here in the UK or elsewhere, are making have profound implications for the future of the construction industry. You know, we have to house people. We have to create places of employment for people. We have to solve the problem of congestion, which is crippling certain industries for much of the time. And we can't just let things carry on as they are. So that does suggest some fundamental shift in how places are put together and then managed once built. We can't just leave them behind. So I think if you could get a sense that this is, first of all, a big challenge and with massive risks if it isn't solved, but also if it is solved, it has the most fantastic opportunities for living, health, culture, innovation, the spirit of a place, all the things that we cherish from history that we regret when we can't find them in the present could be part of a future, but only if we change the way that we're doing things at the moment. And that actually there's a massive goal there, and if we can change the tools that we work with, change the processes that we use those tools in, take advantage of the digital, then there's a big prize.
So on this closing note, we want to remind ourselves that data on its own has no value without people having ideals and ideas on how to use it. So on this, go back to the drawing board and get ready for the next interview session. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks.